Welcome to another episode of How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with me, Alex Chisnell, and him, James Burt.
Hi there, everybody.
We are talking about how to land big name guests for your podcast. Big name guests like...
James Burt. Oh, no.
No.
Oh, sorry. Who's the biggest name guest you've ever had?
Ooh.
Who's your favourite guest?
Ooh. Biggest name, I would say, well, probably Stephen Bartlett at the moment.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But maybe...
Was that the first podcast he'd ever done?
First one ever.
You made him.
Oh,
no, wasn't it the first one he'd ever done? Or was it your first one?
And it was the first one he'd ever done.
Double. You like Diary of a CEO, you're welcome. Chisnell made him.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the first podcast he ever guested on was my podcast.
Ah. What's your...
So maybe like, sorry to interrupt you, going back to your previous point, probably Lewis Howes is more well-known globally than Stephen Bartlett.
Do you reckon? I don't know. I reckon Bartlett's probably catching up.
I reckon he's probably catching up, yeah.
If not overtaken.
But Lewis Howes has been on shows like Ellen DeGeneres show and stuff like that years ago.
That is true.
So I don't know whether he
was my
Stephen
podcasting
Bartlett's
inspiration.
More UK-centric.
Lewis Howes?
Yeah, I remember you saying that. I loved Lewis Howes' School of Greatness. So, yeah, I would say a couple of those guys. I suppose it depends on what context, doesn't it, as well, to a certain degree. Like, but yeah, I suppose, yeah, those would be some of the bigger name guests that I've had on. Favourite guest, only because I was watching it yesterday, I would say somebody like Chemi Olcott from Ski Sunday, who was, four-time Olympian skier, was just amazing. Went to her house in Hampton Court, made me a cup of tea, showed me around, the garden that's literally banks onto the Thames. And wow. And you just think it's just generally wonderful people for giving you their time for free. She was an absolute rock star. So, and it was in person, obviously. But, yeah, a few favourites, I suppose, along the way. But rather than a favourite. How about you?
My...
biggest name?
Probably Rob Dyrdek, who's massive in the States. Oh, actually, I've done Elena Cardone and Grant Cardone.
I was going to say Grant Cardone.
Yeah, they're pretty big. Did the guy who invented the trunky suitcase, Rob Law. Rob Dyrdek, I'd say, that was probably one of my favourite ones because we were just so in the zone of we talk about manifesting and optimising your life, and it's just brilliant. Anyway, so we've talked about now some of the guests that we've really enjoyed having on our podcast. Would you like to know how you can get them onto your podcast as well? Well, first and foremost, you've got to create, and it says here, I've got some notes down here for making sure we tick all the boxes. Craft an irresistible pitch. Yeah. Now that sounds a little bit clickbaity, but you've got to sell them on the concept of being on this podcast, because 9 times out of 10, when you get started with the podcast, if you're in a super niche, people might come on your show because, hey, you've got a podcast and that's cool, and you're talking to their niche audience and an audience that they want to speak to. But as you get bigger as a show and as you are more broad as a show, chances are the guests will only come on if there is a tangible benefit to them, if they can reach a perceived large audience, and they are normally doing it at the point of time when they're promoting or punting something. Yeah. So you've got to really understand what's in it for, we always talk about this on the podcast, what's in it for them in terms of the guests, but in terms of when you're pitching, the listener, but when you're pitching the guests, what's in it for them in terms of getting their message out to the audience that you've already got? Yeah,
and starting out, look, we're not going to sugarcoat this. If you're starting out with a brand new podcast and you are like 99% of the rest of the population that you do not have a massive following, or you're not hugely famous at the very outset, then the chances of you landing a big name for your show are not going to happen, but they are limited to, and I've seen this happen with a number of our clients, are that they already know somebody within their network, or they are one person removed from that network, i.e. it's my brother's best friend happens to be a dragon on Dragon's Den. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of relationship. Yeah. You go, would you mind, I hate to ask a favour, but could you do me a favour? Yeah. And literally go, blah, 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 ask the question. So don't rule it out, is what I always say to everyone about getting a big name guest on your show at the very start of your podcast journey. But to your point, it is more likely to happen when you already have an existing platform and they are looking to access a brand new audience to sell their thing, be that brand new book, album, product, service, whatever that is. But 100% agree with you. You've got to craft that pitch to start with. And for me, that comes all around the personalisation of that pitch. It's not as we've
100%,
seen.
yeah.
You can give the example. We get pitched. I've seen it on the train.
I bet I've got 20.
Literally.
Yeah.
It's like, hi, X.
Insert name.
Insert name. I really loved your insert podcast, which is the last podcast that you actually published.
Love your episode with insert name of guest.
Exactly that. And then it goes, I've got a great guest suggestion. And the one I read this morning on the train was some lawyer talking about something. I have no idea what he's talking about. And I was like, I've never talked about anything like this on my podcast, nor will I ever. Why have you wasted some of your valuable time in pitching this guest? Because I don't have time to even reply to you. I'm sorry, but like you, multiple times a day, across multiple emails getting these, and I just don't have the time to do it. So above all else, personalize your pitch. And by that, for me, I'm interested to get your thoughts on this, but for me, and we've talked about this before, but it's not only saying I'm a big fan of X. Hi Lewis Howes, I'm a really big fan of you. Would you come on my podcast? I really like the School of Greatness podcast. It's making it super personal and not talking about, I'll give you an example, not talking about his book, The Mask of Masculinity, which is when he came on my show to promote that. It's not talking about a specific chapter in The Mask of Masculinity that resonated with me. It's not talking about a particular paragraph that resonated with me, but it's a particular sentence in a particular chapter of a particular book that really resonated to me. And the reason why, okay? You want something that's going to grab somebody's attention. And if you can get a warm intro, like I said, my brother happens to be best friends with Lewis Howes, for example. No idea how he is, but...
Is it? Can you put in a good word for me?
But that is the only other way to do it, I think.
Yeah.
So craft that personalisation pitch. You need to, again, try and capture someone's attention with the title of the email to start with. Find out, who in their team is probably the right person to get to. When I got to Lewis Howes, it was actually... Believe it or not, because this happens 99.99% of the time, it was lewis@lewishowes.com.
Yeah.
And he actually answered it. He copied in his PA, but he actually read it. And I no idea why now looking back on it, but equally, I've gotten people like, Piers Linney from Dragon's Den, just by one DM on LinkedIn, caught their attention, caught them at the right time.
I think there's two secret sources that you've unveiled there. I'll go with the last one first.
Open that jar. Open the secret source.
LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is the most underrated guest outreach platform that there is. Because again, to your point, Lewis Howes, for example, he's got 4, 5, 6 million followers across his TikTok,
but not on
Insta, YouTube. He's got about 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. And you can connect with them easier. Like I'm first connection with Alex Hormozy, Layla Hormozy, all these random people on LinkedIn.
When are we going to Vegas, baby?
Yeah, soon, hopefully. Soon.
Okay.
But actually going through to them on LinkedIn is easier. But also if they are running their podcast as part of a brand and part of an organisation, chances are it will be in that like CV bio thing on LinkedIn. Click into the company, and then on companies pages on LinkedIn, it will tell you the number of staff that it's got, and it will say, look, 2 to 20. Click on 2 to 20, and it will normally show you the people that work there. So you might not be able to get hold of Lewis, but you might be able to get hold of Lewis's PA, Lewis's head of operations, Lewis's head of PR or marketing or whatever it may be. So I think LinkedIn is a secret hack. Not such a secret now because we've just revealed it. It was a secret hack, and now it's not. The floodgates are open.
Oh, God, he's done his voice again.
Because I haven't done it in 2025 yet, but now I have. And then the other thing, I think, the personalisation piece, exactly like you said, like with a book, with a sentence, within the chapter, within the book, that's the right way to look at it. And also, you will start to see people, by the time the book has already come out, they've already done a lot of the promo, the PR, the same with a book or a movie or a TV show or another podcast and stuff like that. And you might be listening to us going, well, I can't get those people on. You bloody well can, because you might have a micro demographic that they want to reach in your geography. To your point about the Lewis Howes thing, yes, his podcast, School of Greatness, is massive, but it's biggest by far in America. Yeah, it's got a sizable audience here in the UK, but chances are, screw it, just do it. Your audience is going to be 90% UK, 10% America,
87.
he's going to be... Is it 87? He knows his numbers, guys. It's not his first rodeo. Whereas he's going to be 87 87 US, 3% UK. So if he wants to go after that geographical audience, chances are he's going to have that. So look at not only personalising in terms of why you'd really want them to come onto your show, why is now the right time right now?
Yeah.
If they're promo saying, I nearly landed, I'm not falling out of them, but he ended up getting annoyed with something that I'd done with Joe Wicks.
I thought you were going to say Joe Rogan, then you fell out with Joe Rogan.
I would not want to fall out with Joe Rogan. Can you imagine? Smash it to pieces. Joe Wicks could probably smash me to pieces as well, to be fair. Or put it out there just in case it becomes like a celebrity fight one day that we could do for charity. Not that I'm a celebrity.
It was an MTV show, wasn't it?
It was Celebrity Deathmatch. Do you remember that? Oh my God, that's so
Brilliant.
weird.
Britney Spears takes down
Christina Aguilera.
Yeah, that was a great episode.
That was so weird, that show. But Joe Wicks, for example, he was promoting. He was talking about he was about to launch a new book. So instead of me waiting for the book and then picking the sentence from the chapter from the book, I preemptively said, "Hey, I know that you're promoting XYZ. I'd love to get you on because my audience is XYZ." And there's two things within the pitch. Number one, you need to personalise it massively, and number two, you need to really, really, subconsciously or consciously, sell the value of your audience.
100%.
So even if you've only got, how many listeners and numbers you've got. The brilliant thing with the podcast, in a lot of instances, is that the numbers aren't visible. You can see it on YouTube, you can see it on Instagram, you can see it on TikTok, you can see it on LinkedIn, but your podcast, no one necessarily knows. There's different platforms out there that you can sort of guesstimate the numbers, but nobody has got an accurate view of your numbers. I landed Grant Cardone coming onto a podcast that was under 6 months old and had less than 5,000 downloads per month. But I presupposed the size of the audience. My audience is entrepreneurs based in the UK.
Yeah.
That was an audience he wanted to speak to, so he came onto the podcast. Now, that's the way of crafting it to make sure that you have got the ability to, number one, engage them. Number two, make it personalised, that they realise it's not just like bullshit generic outreach that we get 1,000 times a day of, hey, insert name here. And then the other thing that you can do in terms of the outreach is not only talk about why you want to do it right now for them and what the value of it, why your audience is valuable, but also show them the other stuff that you're going to do. Because a lot of the time people look at the podcast and go, well, I only get 10,000 downloads, but how big is your reach on Shorts? How big is your reach on TikTok? What do your clips get? What is the combined reach of that show? And if you could say to them, we will do the podcast episode, which will be audio and video. It goes out on these platforms. We will post it across TikTok and Instagram. We had a client of ours who said, I want to get a sponsor on. I said, well, how much reach have you got? They said, I've got no idea. I said, well, how are you going to get a sponsor? But when we looked at it, their reach per month, in terms of their short form, their long form stuff, they're getting about 2 million impressions per month. I was like, that's a decent number. Now you could sell we get 2 million impressions or we get a reach of 2 million people per month. Yeah. That's a good number of people. If you looked at just that client in particular, they were getting 8,000 downloads per month. If you go to Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, Stephen Bartlett, insert name of celebrity here, 8,000 is not going to get them excited, but a reach of 2 million people who are primarily 90% of them in the UK, that's a good demographic. So make sure you are spinning your numbers. Don't lie about them, but make sure you're spinning your numbers in the right way. You'll also be surprised how little people care about the size of the audience. If they like the idea of the show, if they like who the audience is, I've only had it 2 or 3 times where they're like, hey, can you let me know how big the audience is? And then they've gone, no, it's not big enough for us to worry about.
And it's usually, I've found, it's the management company or the agent.
Yes.
And you don't want to. If you can avoid it, do not go through the management company or the agents. You're more likely, as James said, to get through to the person you actually want to interview through something like LinkedIn. I think Instagram less so because you've got, trying to get through a junk folder and it's a busy
it's
space,
hard,
etc. So I would do that. And also to come back to your point on picking the metrics, etc., is like, when if you decide to super professionalize the operation, you can put a deck together that you would send to your guest that tells them all of this in a couple of screens, couple of slides,
couple of pages, on a PDF.
And we do one version for the sponsors and one for potential guests, and it will also reassure them if you've got similar guests. So if I'm going after, for example, a
Just anyone.
Anyone. Give me someone from Who Dares Wins. SAS Who Dares. Jason Fox.
I don't bloody know. Never watched it. Okay. Jason Fox.
Okay, Jason Fox. If I'm going after him to be on my podcast, I could have in my deck. There's also been Jay Morton, Staz, who've also been on Who Dares Win. So he feels comfortable coming on the show because his contemporaries have come on the show. And again, point taken, not everyone's going to have that when you start, but as you start building that out over time, that's going to reassure your guests of the type of caliber of guests that you can cherry pick who to put in there. You can also, magnify that reach, as you said. You could say, our podcast had what was it, 2 million impressions or whatever the figure used was. What we do is, and I've seen it with potential podcasts we're launching, they'll have, these are the prospective guests that we've got on the podcast.
Yeah.
And you then put a number on each of those guests, combine that number, and the number's bonkers as to who you can reach. So, you need to get clever with this. We're definitely not saying lie about this, but you can get clever with it, and you can... use those numbers to your advantage to get the person that you want, which again is only going to, help you in the long term of growing and monetizing your podcast.
Final thing on this point, though, do not think, especially if you're a newbie podcaster, that the be all and end all is having big name guests.
No, disclaimer.
Because I have had big name guests on who have not moved the needle, because I've tracked the actual clickable link. I was like, here's the link for your episode, here's a bunch of assets, and we could attribute 250,000 followers, ended up becoming 91 clicks. Yeah. That was it. But you cannot guarantee that they're going to share the content. But you could have some
audience.
micro niche influencer in LinkedIn, and it absolutely pops. The most popular episode of Building the Brand that I ever did, bearing in mind I've done Grant Cardone, Elena Cardone, Rob Law MBE, Jay Alderton, like all these cool people. Alex Chisnall has been on the podcast.
He blew up.
He did blow
literally.
up. But no, that's burnt out. There's a difference between blew up and burnt out. The most popular episode was when I had my wife on. And she just absolutely rinsed me. Oh, there's two popular episodes. One where Hayley just absolutely mugged me off. And the second one where I was like, because I was doing like a documenting growing an agency, and HMRC sent me a letter going, hey, you owe us 14 grand in 6 days. And it blew up. That episode, obviously, that episode blew up. So those, you think that there's going to be the one guest, and that's going to blow it all up. Doesn't always happen.
And that happened with me, which talked about before, and it's still the number one most downloaded episode of my podcast after 8 years. That was 8 years a couple of days ago. Oh.
Happy anniversary, babes.
Thank you. With Julian Hearn from Huel, which most people
wouldn't have known about Huel back in the day. Yeah.
It was a £50 million brand.
Yeah.
Which is a big brand, but equally it's very small in the great scheme of things. But now it's like, I don't know, £750 million brand, and everyone's heard of Huel. But year 3 of their journey, when I interviewed him, no one had heard of him. But because he had a very super but engaged following on LinkedIn, and he shared the content, that blew up. Went to number 1 in the business chart.
Another key there. Shared the content. It's more valuable for you to have guests who are going to share the content than it is to have big name guests who won't.
And quite often it's not the person you've interviewed. It's finding out who's the person that's actually going to share it. Is it their head of marketing? Is it their PA? That's something you need to find out very early doors in your part of the process of booking that guest.
Absolutely. Well, there's loads of hacks and tips and tricks there, so hopefully you've enjoyed those. If you have enjoyed this week's episode, please feel free to give us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcast. If you watch on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe. If you've got any hacks or tips or tricks for other people who are getting started with how to start, grow, and monetize their podcast, feel free to stick them in the comments, and we will see you on the next episode of the pod. See you then.